The rain fell steadily on the cracked pavement of Riverside District, each drop creating tiny rivers that flowed toward the storm drains. Agent Maya Rodriguez pulled her hood tighter as she walked down the empty street, her footsteps echoing off the abandoned storefronts that lined both sides of the road. For 8 long months, this neighborhood had been her second home, though nobody here knew her real name or what she really did for a living. To everyone in Riverside, she was Kelly Johnson, a small-time dealer trying to make ends meet. She had spent countless hours perfecting this identity, learning the local slang, understanding the unwritten rules of the streets, and most importantly, earning the trust of people who had every reason to be suspicious of outsiders. The transformation hadn't been easy. Maya had grown up in a middle-class suburb, went to college, and joined the FBI straight out of graduate school. This world was as foreign to her as another planet when she first arrived, but now, after months of careful work, she moved through these streets like she belonged here. She knew which corners to avoid after dark, which shop owners could be trusted, and which alleys provided the quickest escape routes. More importantly, she had built relationships with the right people, the kind of people who knew things, who saw things, and who were willing to share information with someone they considered one of their own. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, everything she had worked for would finally come together. In her jacket pocket, a small recording device no bigger than a button waited to capture evidence that would bring down one of the most dangerous corruption rings the city had ever seen. The target wasn't just any criminal organization. These were police officers sworn to protect and serve, who had instead chosen to protect drug dealers and serve their own greed. The investigation had started almost a year ago when the FBI received a tip from an unlikely source. A defense attorney named Patricia Wells had noticed a pattern in drug cases throughout the city. Certain officers kept showing up in cases where evidence mysteriously disappeared, where witnesses suddenly refused to testify, and where major drug shipments seemed to slip through police operations without a single arrest. At first, the Bureau thought it might be incompetence or bad luck, but as they dug deeper, a much darker picture emerged. 3 officers in particular kept appearing in these problematic cases. Detective Raymond Clark, a 20-year veteran with an impressive arrest record who lived far beyond what his salary should allow. Officer Bobby Turner, who had been passed over for promotion multiple times but somehow afforded expensive cars and jewelry. And Sergeant Luis Martinez, who ran the drug task force and seemed to know exactly when and where major operations would take place. Information that somehow found its way to the very criminals they were supposed to be catching. Maya's mission was simple in theory, but incredibly dangerous in practice. She needed to get close enough to these officers to gather concrete evidence of their corruption. Phone records and financial investigations could only go so far. The Bureau needed recordings, photographs, and first-hand testimony that would hold up in federal court. That meant Maya had to become someone these corrupt cops would trust, someone they would include in their illegal activities. The transformation into Kelly Johnson had been carefully planned. The FBI created an entire backstory for her, complete with fake arrest records, known associates, and a reputation as someone who could move product without attracting attention. They set up a small apartment in Riverside, furnished it with the kind of items Kelly would own, and even created social media accounts going back several years to establish her digital footprint. But the hardest part wasn't the paperwork or the fake identity. It was learning to think and act like someone completely different. Maya had to study how Kelly would walk, how she would talk, what kind of clothes she would wear, and most importantly, how she would react under pressure. One wrong word, one misplaced reference to her real life, and her cover would be blown. In this neighborhood with these kinds of criminals, being exposed as a federal agent wouldn't just end her career. It would probably end her life. The training had been intense. Maya spent weeks with consultants who had grown up in neighborhoods like Riverside, learning the subtle differences in speech patterns, body language, and cultural references that would make or break her cover. She practiced her backstory until she could recite Kelly's life history without thinking, until Kelly's memories felt almost as real as her own. For the first few months in Riverside, Maya had focused simply on establishing Kelly's presence in the community. She rented the apartment, found a part-time job at a local diner, and slowly began making connections. She was careful not to push too hard or ask too many questions. Instead, she let people come to her, building trust one conversation at a time. The breakthrough came in month 4 when she met Carlos Vega, a mid-level dealer who controlled several blocks in the neighborhood. Carlos had been suspicious of the new girl at first, but Kelly's patient approach and her apparent knowledge of the business eventually won him over. Through Carlos, Maya learned about the network of corruption that protected his operation and dozens of others throughout the city. It turned out that Detective Clark, Officer Turner, and Sergeant Martinez weren't just taking bribes to look the other way. They were active partners in the drug trade, providing intelligence about police operations, helping to eliminate competition, and even using their official positions to intimidate witnesses and steal evidence. The operation was more sophisticated and more dangerous than anyone at the FBI had imagined. Over the following months, Maya carefully worked her way deeper into Carlos's organization, while simultaneously making contact with the corrupt officers. It was a delicate balance. She had to appear valuable enough to the dealers that they would introduce her to their police contacts, but not so important that her sudden disappearance would be noticed. She also had to be useful enough to the corrupt cops that they would trust her with sensitive information, but not so involved that she would be expected to participate in activities that would compromise her mission or violate federal law. Tonight's meeting was the culmination of all that careful work. Carlos had arranged for Kelly to meet directly with Detective Clark to discuss a major shipment coming through the port next week. The plan was for Maya to wear a wire and record Clark accepting payment in exchange for ensuring that his fellow officers would be looking the other way when the drugs arrived. It was exactly the kind of evidence the FBI needed to bring down the entire network. As Maya walked through the rain toward the meeting location, she ran through the plan one more time in her mind. Everything had to go perfectly. One mistake, one moment of suspicion, and 8 months of dangerous work would be wasted. Worse than that, her life would be in immediate danger. The abandoned warehouse on 5th Street looked exactly like what it was, a forgotten piece of the city's industrial past, left to decay while the world moved on around it. Broken windows stared down at Maya like empty eyes as she approached the building, her footsteps careful and measured on the wet asphalt. This was supposed to be neutral ground, a place where Kelly Johnson could meet with Detective Clark without attracting attention from either criminals or honest cops. Maya checked her watch. She was 5 minutes early, exactly as planned. Being too punctual might seem suspicious, but being late could be interpreted as disrespect, something that could end a meeting before it started. She had learned these subtle rules during her months undercover, understanding that in this world, perception was often more important than reality. The recording device in her jacket felt heavier than its actual weight, a constant reminder of what tonight could accomplish. If everything went according to plan, by morning the FBI would have enough evidence to begin arrests that would dismantle one of the largest police corruption rings in the city's history. But as Maya had learned during her 8 months in Riverside, plans rarely survived contact with reality. She circled the building once, checking for any signs of surveillance or unexpected visitors. The street was empty except for a few parked cars that belonged to residents of the nearby apartment complex. Everything looked normal, which in Maya's experience was usually when things were about to go very wrong. The entrance Clark had specified was a side door that had once been used for deliveries. Maya tested the handle and found it unlocked, just as Carlos had promised it would be. She slipped inside, immediately noticing the musty smell of water damage and years of neglect. Her eyes adjusted slowly to the dim light filtering through the dirty windows, revealing a large open space filled with forgotten machinery and piles of debris. "Kelly, over here." The voice came from the far corner of the warehouse, where a makeshift office had been set up using old filing cabinets and wooden crates. Detective Raymond Clark emerged from the shadows, his heavy frame moving with the confident swagger of a man who believed he owned whatever space he occupied. Maya had studied Clark's file extensively during her preparation for this mission. 52 years old, married with 3 kids, 20 years on the force with a reputation for getting results. On paper, he looked like exactly the kind of cop the city needed. In reality, he was something much darker. "Thanks for meeting me here," Maya said, slipping naturally into Kelly's speech patterns and body language. "Carlos said you might be able to help with our situation next week." Clark nodded, but something in his expression made Maya's instincts go on high alert. There was a tension in his posture that hadn't been there during their brief previous encounters, a wariness that suggested he suspected something was wrong. "Before we talk business," Clark said, pulling out his phone and checking the screen, I need to ask you something. We've been hearing some interesting stories lately. Stories about people asking questions they shouldn't be asking. Maya felt her heart rate increase, but she kept her expression neutral. This wasn't part of the script they had rehearsed. What kind of questions? The kind that get people hurt? Clark replied, his tone becoming noticeably colder. See, my partners and we've built something special here. We've got a good thing going, and we don't like it when people try to mess with that. The warehouse suddenly felt much smaller and darker than it had moments before. Maya's training kicked in as she assessed potential escape routes and weapons. The main entrance was 50 feet away, but Clark was positioned between her and the door. There were windows high up on the walls, but they were too far to reach and probably painted shut anyway. I don't know what you're talking about, Maya said, maintaining Kelly's character while her mind raced through possibilities. Had someone recognized her? Had she made a mistake somewhere along the way? Or was this just standard paranoia from a criminal who had stayed free by being suspicious of everyone? Clark's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. That's funny, because my friend Bobby Turner just told me something very interesting. Seems there's been a federal agent sniffing around Riverside for the past few months. Someone who fits your description perfectly. Maya's blood turned to ice, but she forced herself to react the way Kelly would, with confusion and indignation rather than fear. Are you crazy? Do I look like a fed to you? Carlos can vouch for me. He's known me for months. Carlos, Clark said, his voice dripping with contempt, is currently having a very unpleasant conversation with my other partner, Luis Martinez. Turns out Carlos has been having some financial difficulties lately. The kind of difficulties that might make a man consider cooperating with law enforcement in exchange for leniency. The pieces were falling into place now, and Maya realized just how badly the situation had deteriorated. Somehow the corrupt officers had discovered that there was an undercover agent in their organization. They might not be completely certain that Kelly was that agent, but they were suspicious enough to take action. Look, Maya said, taking a step backward and trying to keep her voice steady. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding here. I came to do business, not to play games. Clark laughed, but the sound was harsh and threatening. Business? Yeah, we're going to do some business, all right. The kind of business that sends a message to anyone else who might be thinking about betraying us. Maya heard footsteps behind her and turned to see two more figures emerging from the shadows. Officer Bobby Turner and Sergeant Luis Martinez approached from different directions, effectively cutting off any chance of escape. Turner was younger than Clark, lean and nervous-looking, while Martinez had the solid build of someone who had spent years in uniform before moving up to detective work. So here's what's going to happen. Clark continued, his hand moving to rest on the weapon at his hip. You're going to tell us exactly who you are, who you work for, and what kind of evidence you think you've collected. Then we're going to decide what to do with you. Maya's mind raced through her options. She could try to maintain her cover, but it was clear that these men were already convinced she was a threat. She could reveal her true identity and hope that the knowledge that she was a federal agent would make them think twice about harming her. Or she could try to fight her way out, though the odds of success against three armed men were not encouraging. I keep telling you, I don't know what you're talking about, Maya insisted, but she could hear the desperation creeping into her voice despite her efforts to control it. Martinez stepped closer, and Maya could smell the alcohol on his breath. We know all about you, Agent Rodriguez. Yeah, that's right, we know your real name. We know where you live, where you work, and where your family lives. The mention of her real name hit Maya like a physical blow. If they knew who she really was, then her cover wasn't just blown, it was obliterated. More importantly, if they knew about her family, then this situation had moved far beyond just her own safety. Turner pulled out a set of handcuffs, his movements quick and practiced. Time to stop playing games. You're coming with us, and we're going to have a nice long conversation about your friends at the FBI. Maya knew that once those handcuffs went on, her chances of survival would drop to almost zero. These weren't just corrupt cops anymore. They were criminals who had been backed into a corner, and cornered criminals were capable of anything. Wait, she said, raising her hands in a gesture of surrender, while her mind frantically searched for any advantage she could find. You're right. I'm FBI, but you don't understand the situation you're in. Clark's expression shifted from anger to curiosity. Enlighten us. Maya took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would either save her life or seal her fate. This whole operation is being monitored in real time. If I don't check in within the next 10 minutes, This place is going to be surrounded by federal agents. It was a bluff, but it was all she had. The silence in the warehouse stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap at any moment. Maya could see the three corrupt officers processing her words, trying to decide whether her claim about backup was real or just a desperate attempt to save herself. Clark's hand remained near his weapon, while Turner nervously shifted the handcuffs from one hand to the other. Martinez moved closer to one of the dirty windows, peering out into the darkness as if expecting to see federal agents surrounding the building. "You're bluffing," Clark said finally, but there was uncertainty in his voice that hadn't been there before. If the feds were monitoring this meeting, they would have moved in already. Maya fought to keep her expression confident while her mind raced through possibilities. The truth was that her backup team was positioned several blocks away, close enough to respond to an emergency, but far enough to avoid detection. She had insisted on this arrangement to protect her cover, but now that distance might cost her everything. "Maybe they're waiting to see what you're going to do," Maya replied, trying to sound more certain than she felt. "Maybe they want to see just how far 3 dirty cops are willing to go." Turner's nervousness was becoming more obvious by the second. "Clark, man, maybe we should think about this. If she's really FBI and if they are watching—" "Shut up," Clark snapped, his patience clearly wearing thin. "She's playing games with us. Look at her. She's scared. If backup was coming, she wouldn't be trying to negotiate." Martinez stepped away from the window, shaking his head. "I don't see anything out there, but that doesn't mean much. These federal types are good at staying hidden when they want to." Maya realized that her bluff was losing effectiveness. She needed to change tactics, to find some other way to buy time or create an opportunity to escape. The warehouse was large, filled with old machinery and debris that could provide cover, but she would have to get past 3 armed men first. "Look," she said, taking a small step toward what she hoped was her best escape route. "We can work something out here. I know things about your operation that could be valuable to you. Names of people who are cooperating with the investigation, evidence that's been collected, plans for future operations." Clark's expression darkened. "The only thing we need from you is silence. Permanent silence." The word sent a chill down Maya's spine, but she forced herself to keep talking. "You kill a federal agent and this whole city will be crawling with FBI for months. Every deal you've made, every contact you have, everything you've built, it all goes away. Is that really what you want?" "What we want," Martinez said, pulling out his own weapon, "is to send a message. Word gets out that there was a Fed in our organization and people start thinking we're weak. People start thinking they can cross us without consequences." Maya could see that reasoning with them was becoming impossible. Fear and desperation were taking over, making them dangerous in ways that greed and corruption never could. She needed to act soon, before their paranoia pushed them past the point of no return. "At least let me call my handler," Maya said, slowly reaching toward her jacket pocket. "Let me tell them that the investigation is over, that I'm pulling out. That way everyone walks away from this." "Don't move," Turner shouted, raising his weapon. "Keep your hands where we can see them." Maya froze, her hand halfway to her pocket. In that pocket was not just her phone, but also the emergency beacon that could summon her backup team. But reaching for it now would almost certainly result in her being shot. Clark moved closer, his eyes never leaving Maya's face. "Here's what's going to happen. We're going to take you somewhere quiet, somewhere we can have a proper conversation about your investigation. Then, depending on how cooperative you are, we'll decide I had to do next. And if I'm not cooperative?" Maya asked, though she already knew the answer. Clark's smile was cold and predatory. "Then you become a statistic, another casualty of the war on drugs. Undercover agent killed in the line of duty. Very tragic. Very final." Maya knew that once they moved her from this location, her chances of survival would become virtually zero. She had to act now, while she was still in a space large enough to potentially escape or hide. The question was how to create enough chaos to give herself a chance. Her eyes fell on a metal container near Turner's position. It was old and dented, with liquid stains around the base that suggested it had once held some kind of industrial solvent or fuel. If it was flammable and if she could create a distraction— "Okay," Maya said, raising her hands in apparent surrender. "You win, I'll cooperate. Just please don't hurt my family. They have nothing to do with this." Clark laughed harshly. "Your family is the least of your worries right now." As Turner moved to put the handcuffs on her, Maya suddenly lunged forward, not toward the exit, but toward the metal container. Her shoulder hit it hard, sending it toppling over and spilling its contents across the concrete floor. The sharp smell of gasoline filled the air immediately. "What the hell?" Martinez shouted, as the three officers scrambled to avoid the spreading puddle of fuel. Maya rolled away from the spill, but not fast enough. Turner, off balance from avoiding the gasoline, stumbled and fell against her, his weight pinning her to the ground. The handcuffs went flying, clattering across the concrete, while his weapon skittered away in the opposite direction. "Get off me," Maya gasped, struggling to free herself from under Turner's weight. Clark and Martinez were both shouting now, their voices echoing off the warehouse walls as they tried to figure out what was happening. The smell of gasoline was getting stronger, making everyone's eyes water and creating an atmosphere of barely controlled panic. "She's trying to escape," Clark yelled, moving around the edge of the fuel spill to get a clear shot at Maya. Maya managed to roll Turner off her and scrambled toward the nearest pile of machinery, using it as cover. Her clothes were soaked with gasoline from rolling on the wet floor, and the fumes were making her dizzy. But she was still free, still alive and still fighting. "This ends now," Clark said, his voice deadly calm despite the chaos around him. He pulled out a cigarette lighter, holding it up where Maya could see it clearly. "You want to play games with gasoline? Let's see how brave you are when the stakes get real." Maya's blood turned to ice as she realized what he was threatening to do. The warehouse was filled with gasoline fumes and she was soaked in the stuff. One spark would turn the entire space into an inferno. "You're crazy," she shouted from behind the machinery. "He'll kill us all." "Maybe," Clark replied, flicking the lighter open and closed repeatedly, each click echoing like a gunshot in the tense silence. "But you'll definitely be the first to go." Martinez and Turner were backing toward the exit, clearly understanding the implications of Clark's threat. But Clark himself seemed beyond rational thought now, driven by rage and desperation into a course of action that could destroy everything. "Last chance," Clark called out. "Come out now and maybe we can work something out. Stay hidden, and I light this place up." Maya pressed herself against the cold metal of the machinery, her mind racing through impossible choices. She could surrender and face certain death at their hands, or she could stay hidden and risk being burned alive. Neither option offered much hope for survival. The sound of Clark's lighter clicking open and closed continued, each sound bringing them all closer to a point of no return. The flame from Clark's lighter danced in the gasoline-soaked air like a tiny demon, casting wild shadows across the warehouse walls. Maya could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears as she crouched behind the rusted machinery, every nerve in her body screaming that death was only seconds away. The acrid smell of fuel filled her nostrils, and she could feel the dampness of gasoline soaking through her jacket, where she had rolled across the spilled liquid. "I'm counting to 3, Clark shouted, his voice echoing off the concrete walls with an edge of madness that made even Martinez and Turner exchange worried glances. 1. Maya's hand moved instinctively to the emergency beacon hidden in her jacket's inner pocket. She had been saving it as a last resort, knowing that activating it would blow her cover completely and potentially compromise other ongoing operations. But with Clark clearly beyond rational thought and the lighter growing closer to the gasoline fumes with each passing second, maintaining her cover had become irrelevant. 2. Her fingers found the small device and pressed the activation button. Somewhere across the city, computers would be alerting her backup team that Agent Maya Rodriguez was in immediate life-threatening danger. But even if they dropped everything and raced to her location, it would still take them several minutes to arrive. She didn't have several minutes. Clark's hand moved the lighter closer to the puddle of gasoline spreading across the warehouse floor. Turner had reached the exit and was practically clawing at the door in his eagerness to escape what was about to happen. Martinez was torn between following his partner toward safety and staying loyal to Clark, who had clearly lost control of the situation. 3, Clark said, and his hand began to lower toward the fuel. Maya burst from her hiding place, not away from Clark but directly toward him. It was the last thing he expected, and his surprise gave her the split second she needed to tackle him around the waist. They went down hard, Clark's heavier frame cushioning Maya's fall as they hit the concrete. The lighter went flying, spinning end over end through the air before landing with a metallic clatter near the warehouse's far wall. "You crazy witch," Clark gasped, struggling to throw Maya off him. "You could have killed us all." "That was your plan, not mine," Maya shot back, using her training to maintain leverage despite Clark's size advantage. Martinez was moving toward them now, his weapon drawn but unable to get a clear shot with Maya and Clark wrestling on the gasoline-soaked floor. "Clark, get off her so I can end this." But Clark was beyond listening to rational advice. Months of paranoia, corruption, and living in constant fear of discovery had finally pushed him over the edge. He managed to roll Maya beneath him, his hands going to her throat as pure rage took over completely. "You destroyed everything," he snarled, his grip tightening around Maya's neck. 20 years of careful work gone because of you." Maya's vision began to blur as Clark's hands cut off her air supply. She clawed at his arms, trying to break his grip, but he was too strong and too far gone to feel pain. In the distance, she could hear Turner shouting something about police sirens. But the words seemed to come from another world. Then the warehouse door exploded inward with a sound like thunder. "FBI! Everyone on the ground, now!" The voice cut through the chaos like a blade, followed immediately by the distinctive red laser dots of sniper scopes dancing across the walls. Maya felt Clark's grip loosen slightly as confusion replaced rage in his expression. "This is Agent Patricia Wells, FBI." The voice continued as tactical teams poured through the entrance. "The building is surrounded. Drop your weapons and get on the ground immediately." Maya had never been so happy to hear another human voice in her life. She managed to break free from Clark's weakened grip and rolled away, gasping for air as her vision slowly cleared. Around the warehouse, she could see black-clad FBI agents taking positions, their weapons trained on the 3 corrupt officers. Clark sat on the concrete floor, his face a mask of disbelief and defeated rage. "This is impossible. There's no way they could have found us this fast." Agent Wells approached cautiously, her own weapon drawn but lowered slightly as she assessed the situation. She was a 20-year veteran of the Bureau, someone Maya had worked with before and trusted completely. Behind her, Maya could see more agents securing the perimeter and checking for additional threats. "Agent Rodriguez," Wells called out, using Maya's real name for the first time in 8 months. "Are you injured?" The sound of her actual name after so many months of being Kelly Johnson was like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. Maya struggled to her feet, her legs shaky from adrenaline and the lingering effects of Clark's attack. "I'm okay," Maya managed to say, though her voice was hoarse from where Clark had tried to strangle her. "But we need to be careful. There's gasoline everywhere." Wells immediately turned to her team. "Hazmat protocol. Nobody strikes any sparks until we get this place ventilated." Martinez had dropped his weapon and was lying face down on the concrete, but Turner was still standing near the exit, his hands raised but his expression calculating. Maya recognized the look of someone trying to figure out if they could still escape. "Don't even think about it, Turner," Wells said without looking in his direction. "We've got the entire block surrounded." Clark slowly raised his hands, but his eyes never left Maya's face. "Agent Rodriguez," he said, practically spitting the name. "I should have known. You were too good at playing the part." "Playing the part was the easy bit," Maya replied, accepting a clean jacket from one of the tactical officers to replace her gasoline-soaked clothing. "Learning to think like a criminal was harder. But apparently I had good teachers." Wells gestured for the handcuffs. And within moments, all 3 corrupt officers were secured and being read their rights. Martinez was crying quietly, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. Turner kept demanding to call his lawyer, his voice getting higher and more desperate with each repetition. But Clark just stared at Maya with a mixture of hatred and grudging respect. 8 months, he said as the agents prepared to lead him away. 8 months you lived in our world, pretended to be one of us. How does it feel to be such a good liar? Maya looked at him for a long moment before answering. "It feels like justice." As the 3 men were led away to waiting vehicles, Wells turned to Maya with a mixture of relief and concern. "When your beacon activated, we thought for sure we were coming to collect a body. What the hell happened in here?" Maya looked around the warehouse, taking in the spilled gasoline, the scattered equipment, and the scorch marks where Clark's lighter had fallen. "They found out who I was. I'm not sure how, but they knew I was FBI. Clark lost it completely and tried to burn the place down with all of us inside." Wells shook her head in amazement. 20 years I've been doing this job, and I still can't understand how cops go that bad. These weren't criminals who happened to wear badges. These were officers who chose to become criminals. The worst part," Maya said, accepting a bottle of water from another agent, "is that they were good at their jobs when they wanted to be. Clark's arrest record was impressive. Martinez ran an effective task force. Turner was decorated for bravery. They had everything they needed to be real heroes. Instead, they chose to be villains, Wells observed. And now they'll spend the rest of their lives paying for that choice. Maya nodded, but her mind was already moving beyond the immediate aftermath of the arrest. 8 months of undercover work had given her insight into a world of corruption that extended far beyond these 3 officers. Tonight's arrest was just the beginning of what would likely be a much larger investigation. 6 months after that terrifying night in the warehouse, Maya Rodriguez stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of the federal courthouse, watching the city stretch out below her. The morning sun reflected off the glass towers of downtown, creating a scene that looked peaceful and orderly from this height. But Maya knew better now. She had seen what lurked beneath the surface of this city, the networks of corruption and violence that operated in the shadows, while ordinary citizens went about their daily lives. The courtroom behind her was filled with reporters, FBI agents, family members of victims, and curious members of the public who had followed the case through months of headlines. Today was sentencing day for Detective Raymond Clark, Officer Bobby Turner, and Sergeant Luis Martinez, the 3 corrupt officers whose arrest had triggered the largest police corruption investigation in the city's history. Maya's reflection in the window showed a woman who looked older than her years, marked by experiences that couldn't be easily forgotten. The physical scars from that night were minimal, some bruising around her throat that had healed within weeks. But the psychological impact ran much deeper. For 8 months she had lived as Kelly Johnson, thinking like a criminal, acting like someone without moral boundaries. Coming back from that had been harder than anyone at the Bureau had anticipated. "Agent Rodriguez?" A voice behind her interrupted her thoughts. Maya turned to see Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Adams approaching with a thick folder of documents. Adams had been the lead prosecutor on the case, a tough woman in her 40s who had built her career on taking down corrupt officials. "The defense attorneys are making one last attempt at a plea bargain," Adams said, her expression showing what she thought of that idea. "They want to avoid the attempted murder charges in exchange for full cooperation with ongoing investigations." Maya shook her head firmly. "Clark tried to burn me alive. Turner and Martinez were right there, ready to help him do it. If we let them plead down now, what message does that send to other cops who might be thinking about crossing the line?" Adams smiled grimly. "That's exactly what I told them. These men made their choices, and now they get to live with the consequences." The investigation that had followed Maya's rescue had been massive in scope and devastating in its findings. The 3 arrested officers had been just the tip of an iceberg that extended throughout multiple precincts and involved dozens of other law enforcement personnel. Carlos Vega, the dealer who had introduced Maya to the corrupt cops, had indeed been cooperating with law enforcement, but only after being arrested on unrelated charges and facing decades in prison himself. The recordings Maya had made during her months undercover, combined with financial records, surveillance footage, and testimony from other criminals who had decided to cooperate, rather than face enhanced sentences, had painted a picture of corruption that shocked even experienced federal investigators. The network had been operating for at least 5 years, protecting drug operations worth millions of dollars while undermining legitimate police work throughout the city. "Have you decided what you're going to say when the judge asks for victim impact statements?" Adams asked. Maya had been dreading this moment. Standing up in court and speaking directly to the men who had tried to kill her felt like reopening a wound that was just beginning to heal. But she also knew that her words might be the difference between a sentence that truly reflected the severity of their crimes and something that allowed them to return to the streets in a few years. "I've written something," Maya said, patting the folded paper in her jacket pocket. "I'm not sure I'll be able to get through it, but I have to try." The courtroom doors opened and people began filing back in from the morning recess. Maya could see Clark, Turner, and Martinez being led to their seats by bailiffs, all 3 men wearing orange jumpsuits instead of the police uniforms they had once worn with pride. Clark looked older and more tired than he had 6 months ago, the stress of imprisonment and legal proceedings having taken their toll. Turner kept looking around the courtroom nervously, as if still hoping for some last-minute rescue. Martinez stared straight ahead, his expression blank and resigned. "All rise," the bailiff announced as Judge Harrison Walsh entered the courtroom. Walsh was known for his no-nonsense approach to sentencing and his particular distaste for corruption cases involving public officials. Maya took her seat in the front row, directly behind the prosecution table. She could feel the eyes of the three defendants on her, but she refused to look in their direction. After months of therapy and debriefing sessions, she had learned to separate the person she was now from the Kelly Johnson persona she had inhabited for so long. But being in the same room with the men who had tried to murder her still brought back memories she would rather forget. "Before we proceed to sentencing," Judge Walsh said, his voice carrying easily through the packed courtroom, "I want to address the impact of this case on our community. The defendants were sworn officers of the law, entrusted with protecting the citizens of this city. Instead, they chose to protect criminals and profit from the very crimes they were supposed to prevent." The judge's words carried a weight that made the entire courtroom feel heavy with the gravity of what had transpired. Maya had read the pre-sentencing reports and knew that the judge had been particularly moved by testimony from families whose loved ones had been killed in drug-related violence that the corrupt officers had helped enable. "Detective Clark," Judge Walsh continued, "you have been found guilty of attempted murder of a federal officer, conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, racketeering, and multiple counts of obstruction of justice. Do you have anything to say before I impose sentence?" Clark stood slowly, his attorney beside him. For a moment he seemed about to speak, but then he simply shook his head and sat back down. Maya had expected some kind of apology or expression of remorse, but she realized that Clark still believed he had been justified in his actions. "Officer Turner," the judge said, "you face similar charges and have been found guilty on all counts. Do you wish to address the court?" Turner's voice was barely audible when he spoke. "I'm sorry, Your Honor, I know what we did was wrong. I have a family, children who need their father. Please consider that when you decide my sentence." It was a pathetic attempt at generating sympathy, and Maya could see from Judge Walsh's expression that it had failed completely. Turner's children might need their father, but the victims of the crimes he had enabled would never have that chance. "Sergeant Martinez," Judge Walsh said, "do you have anything to say?" Martinez stood and looked directly at Maya for the first time since entering the courtroom. "Agent Rodriguez," he said, his voice steady but filled with something that might have been regret. "I want you to know that what happened in that warehouse wasn't supposed to happen." Clark lost control. "That wasn't who we were supposed to be." Maya felt a surge of anger at his words. They might not have intended to become attempted murderers, but they had chosen to become criminals. Everything that followed was simply the logical conclusion of that choice. Judge Walsh called for victim impact statements, and Maya found herself walking to the podium on unsteady legs. The courtroom was completely silent as she unfolded her prepared remarks. But when she looked up at the three defendants, the words she had written seemed inadequate. "Your Honor," Maya began, her voice stronger than she had expected, "for 8 months, I lived in a world where corruption was normal, where police officers were just another type of criminal. These 3 men didn't just break the law, they broke something much more important, the trust that holds our society together." She paused, looking directly at Clark, whose expression remained defiant despite everything that had happened. "When Detective Clark tried to burn me alive in that warehouse, he wasn't just trying to silence a witness. He was trying to destroy the idea that justice could prevail over corruption. But he failed. Justice did prevail, and it's prevailing again today." Maya folded her statement and returned to her seat, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she had been carrying. Judge Walsh imposed sentences that reflected the full severity of the crimes. Clark received life in prison without the possibility of parole for the attempted murder charge, plus additional consecutive sentences for his other crimes. Turner and Martinez each received 45 years, ensuring that they would spend the rest of their productive lives behind bars. As the defendants were led away for the final time, Maya felt a sense of closure that had been missing for months. The investigation that had grown out of her undercover work had resulted in 43 additional arrests and the dismantling of a corruption network that had operated for years. It had been dangerous, traumatic, and life-changing work, but it had also been necessary. Walking out of the courthouse into the afternoon sunshine, Maya was approached by Agent Wells, who had become something of a mentor during the difficult months of recovery and legal proceedings. "So what's next?" Wells asked. "The Bureau has approved your transfer request to the White-Collar Crime Division. Less dangerous, but probably just as important in the long run." Maya looked back at the courthouse one last time, thinking about the 3 men who would spend the rest of their lives paying for their choices. I think I'd like to work on cases where the criminals wear suits instead of badges, she said, at least for a while. As they walked toward the parking garage, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope for the future, and confidence that justice, however delayed, would always find a way to prevail.